We're going to start. Thank you. Next up is the law department. My lawyer. Please.
My name is Sozi Pedro Tulante. I'm the city solicitor and head of the law department. And it appears I'm joined by almost all my staff, but it's not all of them. I'm joined by Craig Straw. He's my first deputy, and he's to my left, and Donna Mosaic, who's our deputy administrative solicitor, as well as other members of the law department who are here. Thank you for having me here, Council President Clark and members of the Committee of the Whole. I obviously am aware that you have my written testimony, so unless you object, I am going to provide merely a digest, a summary of my written remarks.
Thank you, sir.
Some of the highlights there, as Council is aware, for the fiscal year, this past fiscal year, we've expended tremendous effort defending the Philadelphia beverage tax. We spearheaded a team to defend the tax, and as you're aware, in December, the Court of Common Pleas dismissed a lawsuit that was filed by the American Beverage Association. Since then, that lawsuit was appealed to the Commonwealth Court, and the court en banc heard oral argument last month, and we don't know when the decision will be issued by the Commonwealth Court, but I can tell this body that the court recognizes that both parties want expedited resolution of that matter. I've been spending a substantial amount of my time dealing with the issue of sanctuary cities, along with a couple members of my staff. We've also we retained two law firms at Deckert as well as Hogan Lovells to look at both federal and state challenges to the city's finances. And they're fairly complicated, but we think that the city is in pretty solid legal grounds to proceed, and we're obviously working with the administration and briefing council on a regular basis to ensure that you know where the city is on that issue. One of the things that when I came in as solicitor I wanted to focus on was on affirmative and general litigation, and as a result we've actually been able to beef up our efforts to try to collect on liens and judgments. And as I believe, as of now, we're up to about $650,000 in collections as a result of these efforts. We've also put a focus on diversity and inclusion. So I meet with Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer Nolan Atkinson quarterly, and the results are clear from where I stand in terms of the success of our efforts. We've hired a total of 50 new employees from January 1st, 2016 through December 31st. 56% or 28 individuals were diverse. We've also focused on attorney hires. Of the 30 attorneys that we've hired during that period of time, 57% or 17 were diverse. We've created a diversity committee, which is led by Michelle Flamer, to focus on implementing strategies to not only recruit attorneys, and part of our challenge is actually retaining attorneys into the law department, educate employees on current and relevant diversity issues, create marketing and networking activities and opportunities. We had our first Black History Month program this in February. We had a Hispanic Heritage Month program, and we're going to have a Women's Month program as well. So that is a summary of my testimony. I know there are a lot of issues to potentially discuss, but I wanted to just give a digest on some of the highlights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solicitor. Let's add a couple of questions. Your budget detail on section 29, page 4, the general fund has $1.2 million reduction in class 200 associated with a non-reoccurring FY2017 increase. Can you please detail the purpose of the reduction?
Yeah, the reduction is actually a result of good news. As council is aware, this year we have negotiations with District Council 47, with fire and police. Historically, we've relied substantially on outside counsel to do most of that work. And so in anticipation of that, we had transferred some funds last year for that outside counsel work. What has happened now with Deputy Mayor Rich Laser and Office of Labor Relations taking the lead in that, it's actually led to a reduction of outside counsel fees. And so as we're able to extrapolate out, it was clear to us that we didn't need those monies, because we used DC 33 negotiations as a template, and we realized that we're actually seeing substantial savings in outside counsel fees. And so we worked with budget, and we determined that we can actually safely and responsibly reduce those costs.
Okay.
And that's a direct result of that.
It helps to have a person in the government that can actually talk to both sides.
Yes.
Particularly talk to the workforce in a reasonable way. All right, that's a good thing. I guess that's a template for future mayors. Always have somebody that's close to you who can talk to the workforce and as it relates to negotiating a contract. Let me see. You talked about, in your testimony, you highlight the effectiveness of the law department in defending the city from a $20 million lawsuit related to an airport expansion. How do you get to a point where you make a decision on settling on a case? And I know this came up in the last administration because the indemnities fund was going relatively high, and we were concerned about that. Also, I believe during the ABI, well, actually post-ABI, there were issues with respects to some of the tax filings and appeals, and the law department was involved in some of those aspects, of those negotiations. When do you all make decisions on whether cut bait, fish, or whatever that term is? I can't remember what it is, fish or cut bait or something. But at some point, when you're getting to a point, you say, well, we may lose this case, and it's better to settle versus an award that may be through the roof. Is there, or is it a case-by-case basis?
It's on a case-by-case basis, but we have some general principles. Clearly, if we are presented with a demand, often that's how our cases began prior to a lawsuit, and we evaluate it, and it's clear that, there is an opportunity, that on the merits, we do some investigation that the city will have some liability. We want to be upfront and try to resolve the case, because on the federal level, when we have civil rights cases, for instance, there's attorney's fees involved. So, if you're able to resolve a case pretty early, then you can remove that. Within the law department, we have authority depending on rank. So I get involved in cases where the authority is $1 million or more. But if it's a case of significant precedent or public importance, I get involved at a pretty early stage. For instance, on some of the big police cases, I personally get involved because I want to make sure we're being fiscally responsible. But I can't talk about what was done in the past. But the way we want to be in a position as a department that if we think that a case is resolvable, that parties don't want to resolve at a reasonable settlement amount, it's important sometimes for us to go to trial because it allows us to value our cases, and it sets a message. Right. Because if folks know that city is easy pickings, they're just going to keep suing you and expect for settlements. I have folks here who can talk about, sort of specifically on tax cases. They're below me. There's the Valerie Robinson, the corporate chair, who has authority, and below that, there's Chief Revenue Counsel Francis Beckley, who also has authority. But we can give you more details on.
This is a general question. One last. City, county, we're both, and I think this probably contributes to our quote-unquote structural deficit. Our requirement to fund certain county functions, such as the courts. That's clearly a county function, but yet we have to cough up the money. And I think we went to court, we sued years ago. You got any veterans that were around at that time? It's my understanding that we actually challenged the unwillingness of the state to fund our court system. And I believe we actually won. But the General Assembly basically said, whatever, and didn't appropriate money for that. Am I right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one, would we ever revisit that, or is that essentially based on the way, I guess, the Constitution is written, that the General Assembly can essentially ignore the court ruling? And two, are there any other county function mandates, unfunded mandates, because as a result of us being a county?
Well, I don't know if we have any veterans here. I know,
I know
Richie Fader.
Richie's always
who runs our legislation.
Anytime we
speak
do
to
the
that.
archives thing, Richie always steps to the plate.
Good afternoon, Council President, members of the committee. Richie Fader, Chief Deputy City Solicitor for Legislation. The story is not quite, is actually worse than the way you presented it. I don't believe the city has ever brought such a lawsuit, but the County of Allegheny brought several lawsuits challenging the state's failure to fund the local courts on the theory that it's really a state constitutional responsibility. And the Supreme Court did twice say, yes, that's correct, it is a state responsibility. The General Assembly made several small moves in the direction of funding the courts. I believe they now pay for the judges themselves and maybe the judges' top staffs, but not the not the vast majority of court employees. And several years ago, the County Commissioners Association brought another enforcement action with the Supreme Court saying, could we please get the General Assembly to do something? And the Supreme Court held that the General Assembly has done enough and we're closing shop, and they're now in compliance with the Constitution. So although you look puzzled, and I was puzzled also when I read that decision, the Supreme Court made it very clear that in their view, the General Assembly has now is now in compliance with the constitutional responsibility to fund the courts, even though
Because of those
small steps that they have taken and additional steps that they are contemplating. I haven't read the decision in a few years, but that was clearly what the Supreme Court said, which was, don't bother us anymore. We can't get the General Assembly to do any more than...
there's more of that.
We can't, well, between the lines, we can't get the General Assembly to do any more than that, and that's as much as you're going to get.
And that ruling stands. So that was their ruling then, so it's no need to even attempt to revisit that.
It's always worth looking at things again, but the Supreme Court did not appear to leave us very much of an opening.
Yeah, okay. Any other particular functions that we have a quote-unquote unfunded mandate as a result of being a county? And I'll understand if you can't answer that, kind of threw this one from left field.
We'll think about it more. I mean, there's sort of other county functions, but the question is whether they're unfunded, but we can...
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind us getting in line to wait for the state to give us money. We right behind the school district.
The school district, that's a good unfunded one.
Yeah, tell me about it, all right? Well, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fader.
Councilman Green, I believe.
Councilman, wait
Information.
a minute.
I actually want to
Who was at the point of, which one?
to follow up with Richie on that point.
Councilman Green,
Right.
you had a point of information?
Yeah, point of information.
You were actually next.
What?
You were actually next.
Okay.
No, I'm saying your time is up. You're teed
Okay.
up.
Well, I wasn't sure if you were finished your...
No, I'm good. That's what I'm
Okay.
saying. You're...
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that litigation issue. Was there any, I guess, mandamus perspective from the court to direct the General Assembly to fund the county? Because I vaguely, it's been some years since I read that opinion too. But I got the perspective that the Supreme Court, and that court had a different composition than the current court from a perspective in reference to the city of Philadelphia. They basically said, you've done enough, but I don't remember anything that was actually in the case that was brought actually directing the General Assembly to fund County of Philadelphia or Allegheny County, because I think Governor Rendell at one point also sued when he was mayor as well.
What I do remember, Councilman Green, is that the Supreme Court did direct the General Assembly to fund the county courts, and the Supreme Court said it one or two or maybe even three times, and by the third or fourth time, the Supreme Court said, okay, you've satisfied our mandate. As the Council President suggested, there may be more going on behind the scenes, but I don't recall the court itself ever stepping into such a lawsuit, because from the court's perspective, right now there's state legislation that requires us to step in, the city, and provide the funding. And so from the court has, in the past years, have sued the city for the city not providing, in the court's judgment, sufficient funding. But from the court's perspective, they don't really care where they get it from, the city or the state.
Gotcha. Okay. So continuing on my line of questions, Mr. Delonte, good afternoon. Just had some questions. Looking in the budget detail, pages 14 under the general fund, pages 27 and page 29. 27 is on the aviation and 29 is on the community development fund. There are a number of investigative matters that are listed to various outside counsel. Can you just give me a general sense of what those matters may be?
Yes, if you don't mind, I'll just catch up on...
Page 14 in the budget detail, page 27, and page 29.
Ours
29 is the aviation fund.
Ours doesn't have page numbers, that's why.
Oh,
So we're catching up a little
you
bit.
gotta talk to Rob DeVille about that.
Find it. Is
It's under your class 200, professional
okay,
services.
I see it. Yes.
But in both the general fund, community development fund, aviation fund, it has various investigative matters, and I've seen them slightly in the past, but never that many from so many different various firms. If you can just give me some general perspective.
On the investigative matters?
Right.
All right, let me see. It's legal services. Oh, yes, I see. For investigative matters, you're asking what they relate to?
Yeah, is it just generally, is it for specific, I mean, give me just a sense of what they are.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really get into details. What I can say is that if there are any investigations being conducted, we have to retain counsel for certain individuals, and that is because we have to avoid conflict with the city, and so we're able to that's what that refers to.
Got it. Couple other things. So you talked in your testimony about the efforts you've had, and I commend you on the efforts you've had in reference to bringing diverse attorneys into the law department. What have been some of the challenges of trying to maintain the momentum this year and going forward? I know you talked about a diversity initiative you had, but what are some of the challenges, and what's happening in some of the other law departments and other jurisdictions around the country, and what they're trying to do in this end?
To be frank, the greatest challenge we have is salary. In effort to, I think we can bring folks in. I mean, our starting salary is $50,865, but I think we, just from being out in the community, I go to barristers meetings, I'm in the Hispanic Bar Association, I try to be very visible and present so that folks know that, there's a place for them in the law department. But I think what it's clear to us is that at a certain point, folks look at us and said, well, I have other opportunities. And because unlike the DA's office and defenders, we have, many of our attorneys are doing work that they can do at corporate law firms. They have opportunities to go there. Or we've recently lost 2 attorneys to the school district. They can go to other public entities. And the reason I mention that is because that impacts attrition, and a lot of the attrition is felt most heavily by attorneys of color. And so I always recognize that you can recruit and bring people in, but if you really want to be able to retain them, that's going to be a consistent issue. And to echo some of the things you've probably heard from the DA's office, what we've tried to do nationally is that I'm a board member of the International Municipal Lawyers Association, so it's all those city solicitors from across the country. In fact, we're bringing them here, the top 50 in Philadelphia, we're hosting them. And we talk about other ways that you can try to create morale, right? Nominate folks for prizes, encourage people, make people feel very welcome. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the salary and thinking about ways that we can address that. Because as you recall, if you graduate from law school, given the current tuition, you're looking at a 6-figure debt load. And that's something that we keep thinking about, and we keep trying to be very creative, and we're in conversations with different people to try to address that.
I have one more question in this round. You mentioned the issue of sanctuary cities, and my concern is not as much at the federal level, but more at the state level regarding legislation. And I know we've had some meetings in that regard. Has there been any coordination with any of the legal departments for some of the counties in the Commonwealth? I know the County Commission Association of Pennsylvania has been watching this legislation, but I was curious about any of the other counties that some of our members of the General Assembly, I don't think have a full understanding of how that legislation that came out of the Senate would impact their county.
Yes, the state, and we spent most of our attention on SB 10 because that's the legislation that has the most momentum in Harrisburg. And what we've done is I've had conversation with other solicitors, and because we want to reframe the conversation as being one around, not one of Harrisburg versus Philadelphia, it's Harrisburg versus 34 other counties according to ACLU who also do not honor detainers without a warrant. And so that if people feel like they're voting to try to defund Philadelphia or to expose us to tort liability, they're actually voting to defund their own municipalities, their own counties, and also subject those to tort liability.
Right.
And one of the push I've been trying to make, this is just not just in the law, but also in the messaging and the conversation, is that this is more than just about Philadelphia. We're the most visible example, but there are counties who would never consider themselves sanctuary cities or municipalities of refuge as defined by SB 10, but are also potentially would fall under it. And so and sometimes it's a surprise to them, but if you look at the definition, because they have to honor the Third Circuit case, which essentially requires a warrant, then they're putting between a rock and a hard place. And that's why I think the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania has come out pretty strong against SB 10, and we hope that they continue that momentum, because we think the state challenges are much more challenging and they're more imminent than at the federal level.
Yeah, I would agree. Has there been any, and I'm not sure if I've read or heard of any commentary from Governor Wolf what his position is on SB 10?
I'm not aware of any where his position is, but I can say that we're in conversation with our state partners about the legal infirmities with some of the things coming out of Harrisburg.
Okay. Thank you, Council President. I have some more questions. I'll come back around.
Okay, Councilman, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Council President. Good afternoon, Solicitor and the team. Thank you for being here. Just you were talking about sanctuary cities, and I want to thank you, your team, and the administration for the willingness to actually have public conversation and explaining to community groups in my district about the misperception of what a sanctuary city is, and the reality that public safety is first and foremost, no matter what. And that we have our local jurisdiction here in our court system that really controls if a crime is committed. Not sure on the severity of it, but if somebody commits a crime, the appropriate laws will apply to that regardless of status. So I had a community meeting with all of my registered community organization presidents in my district, and the combination of your department and the mayor's office explaining to my community groups the reality of what is a sanctuary city, I think the PR and spin from national politics really having some legs. I think they were enlightened. Some understood, and some still had some questions, but I think they all left understanding that sanctuary city is really the Fourth Amendment, right? And I know we're trying to send that message out. So a few community organizations, and I figure this is the appropriate time to mention it publicly, that a few of my RCOs enjoyed the opportunity to have a conversation on what a sanctuary city is, and they want to offer that to their membership, all right, to the public at large in their defined areas. So we're going to be doing that over the summer and in the fall in smaller groups. So which is, I think, is going to be helpful to you and the city. I hope, and have that continued support there.
And I appreciate that, Councilman Heenan, because a lot of the time I spent on the sanctuary cities is actually trying to explain to people that we're complying with the Constitution and what that means, and why a criminal warrant is different from an ICE detainer. And I think that often requires, and I appreciate you for inviting Mayor Enriquez, Brian Abernathy, and Jim Mengler to your district, sometimes requires talking to people who may not necessarily agree with you, but they don't understand. and I think they want to feel engaged, and that's one thing that we've been trying to do.
It is, and I encourage other members to do the same in their district. I encourage, in any opportunity that you have where people are questioning what a sanctuary city is, what it means, right, that we really take advantage of having that conversation, because it had a positive outcome. Right?
That's good to hear.
It's a lot of politics comes into play with it, but the reality is public safety is first and foremost, and that message needs to get out. Working with the Criminal Justice Center. We had just alone, this morning we had the CJC, or not the CJC, I apologize, the First Judicial District. We're talking about how it was created. I mean, First Judicial District is in, we pay, they receive grants from the state, I guess, to satisfy the court's ruling. So they're in compliance, but we do pay our First Judicial District. But in their presentation this morning, right, they showed on their data that almost 5,000 interpreters for the court system. All right, and that's not everybody. When we're talking about sanctuary cities, I mean, it's 5,000. That's only a fraction of the different communities, all right, in different languages that we speak here in our city, which goes to, we need to tread lightly, and we need to publicly, continue to talk about what's in the best interest, of our city.
Absolutely.
Last year, we were talking about, having a 36-day delay in addition to, the process for signing contracts and moving, with procurement. And the city has initiated an electronic signature pilot initiative. My understanding that has gone well, and it's in coordination with the law department. Can you just confirm that it is, in fact, with new technology, with the electronic signature, we're going to be able to, have prompt pay and move things a little more quicker through our process?
Yeah, and I gave a little highlight in I think before, but the system allows us. The goal is to try to move away from paper. And I can give you an example from where I sit as a department head. I get an email saying I have a contract and you're the responsible signer. And that allows me to go in there, I click a button, it's digitally signed, it's authorized, and it goes. That same contract, a month ago, it would be a stack this high before me. And I think that's allowed for quick coordination, also not just within the city, but also with folks who are outside the city who are contracting with us. And one of the things, in addition to just the electronic contracts, is we also evaluate ACES, because not all the contracts are electronic, to figure out ways. We've been talking to the Chief Administrative Office and trying to figure out ways to reduce the time it takes. There are multiple steps, and it'll take me hours to explain the archaic system behind that. But to try to move quickly so that you don't have the delays, not just for an initial contract, but also most of our contracts are renewals. Right? So you shouldn't have renewals that take longer than the initial contract. And most of our renewals are really just for time or amount. They're not substantive portions of the contract.
So it was a successful pilot initiative.
It is a successful pilot, yeah. The challenge is sort of expanding it to other programs.
Because I know we're excited about it. We hear it a lot. And, having that kind of program that coordinates with some of our legacy programs that we have here, when it comes to technology, it's just so much needed.
Yeah.
So I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Jones?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Solicitor.
Good afternoon, Councilman Jones.
no disrespect, but the reason I'm late, I had to decide between hearing you or this delectable piece of chicken that I really wanted.
I never
I
stood a
just want you
chance.
to know, I chose you. For that chicken in my office.
We don't believe that, sir. We don't believe that.
I probably missed this question, but I'm going to ask it again. First of all, thank you for giving us the heads up about sanctuary cities and our potential exposures. I've been like Paul Revere, going up to the state, asking them, and they looked at us, when I raised it at some of the board levels, are we preparing a plan B? They looked at me for what? And like, this would never happen. And so since then, I think they've caught up with your thinking that we should be prepared always, both legally and financially, to assume that that could happen. Can you update us as to where the case is now, how our exposures look?
You mean on sanctuary cities?
Yes,
Or?
sanctuary
Yeah.
cities. So I know there was some court movement.
Yeah, where we are in sanctuary cities is, as much as sanctuary cities is seen is put in the political realm, much of our work began under the Obama administration. The Department of Justice had advised us that we have to certify with respect to some grants. So at that point, we actually started evaluating this. And what I did is, by retaining two firms who, one is doing it pro bono, that's Deckert, and one at $25,000 cap, at very affordable rates to the city. We have folks who are actually looking at this deeply. There's no live legal case on sanctuary cities. There was a ruling that was issued last week out of San Francisco, Judge Orrick, and his order was on the executive order. So it said that it was issued a temporary restraining order that the administration, the Trump administration, can invoke the executive order to defund so-called sanctuary cities. That doesn't really impact Philadelphia because we still have to certify by June 30th that we comply with federal law. We will certify by June 30th that we so comply. And then that puts the onus on the administration to tell us if they disagree. And at that point, we have our options open, but I can tell you that, we meet weekly, both within the administration and also the lawyers. We talk, we have conference calls every week or so just to be able to go through the legal issues, because it's one of those things that it's a gift that keeps giving for a lot of politicians. Everybody wants to talk about it, but it's rarely defined and it rarely is discussed in a way that actually is within the law. So how can the federal government do this? If they want to defund Philadelphia, what do they have to do? And that's what we're preparing for. And as Councilman Green indicated, for us, we've always thought that the state is a more imminent threat, in part because federally we can argue the 10th Amendment, that we're separate sovereign, but as you know very well, that we're a creature of the state, subject to the Home Rule Charter and the Constitution. So they can make us do certain things, but they can't make us do things that are unconstitutional. And that's what SB 10 purports to do, as we understand it.
So at greater risk aren't entitlements, they're discretionary grants from your old briefing that you gave us? It's the discretionary grants?
Yeah, I mean, SB 10 speaks very generally about grants, and our view's always been that there's certain grants that are that the state has to give us, or so we think that it really would apply to discretionary grants, and we're evaluating what that means, how much that is, and where we go from there. But for instance, for child welfare, we have certain children in need, and they give us those funds. We think that the state can't possibly intend that we lose that simply because of this policy. One has nothing to do with each other. I think it applies to funds where the state says, well, we can give it to somebody else. We don't have to give it to you. We don't like your policy. We're going to give it to somebody else. And we're investigating that.
One other aside, how are we doing with lawsuits due to everything from slip and fall to people bringing suit by way of abuse, whether in DHS or whether in police actions based on the Police Advisory Committee? What is our exposure there?
I'll speak very generally, and Craig can get into more detail. Actually, our police lawsuits, specifically the ones we're most concerned about shootings, they've gone down. And We also, one of the things about suits related to DHS, for instance, is that the legal threshold is very high. So many seasoned attorneys recognize that they're not likely going to prevail if they sue the city because they have to show that we created the danger. You know, if something happens that we were aware of it and we did something like that. And they often find that it's more useful to sue a provider or sue someone else. But we're seeing that trending down. And in part, I could be honest that it's a lot of the work that Commissioner Ross and Commissioner Ramsey did with the Department of Justice. Body cameras we think will help. Some of the pilot studies have shown that they actually reduce complaints and they reduce claims of excessive force because you say the police did A, but then we actually have the body camera that can tell you what happened. I know Craig will follow up.
If I can talk to you too about the indemnities fund, and if you look at how that's worked this fiscal year, there has not needed to be a transfer ordinance to increase the amount. We're within the budget of what we were expecting to be in, and we, at this point, believe we're going to make it through the fiscal year without any additional money and without having to delay payments into the next fiscal year. So I think from looking at it from a sort of number of lawsuits and the settlements, we're in a very good position based on sort of how the law department takes a proactive stance in looking at training of police officers, training of streets employees, making sure that the water department personnel know sort of what their requirements are. And all of our litigation units also serve as sort of an advisory unit and a training opportunity, and we take advantage of that.
And by example, we had, in fiscal year 2012, we had 119 cases of excessive force. That's down to 56. And so that shows the downward trajectory that we're seeing because of being proactive.
Appreciate it very much so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Don, please.
Chairman, and good afternoon, Solicitor. I have
Good afternoon,
one question
Councilman
for you. How you doing? Following up on Councilman Jones's questions on the litigation, in your testimony, it says the number of incoming lawsuits in 16 were 2,020, and in 18 are 2,044, pretty much the same. And the number of cases closed litigation in 16 were 1,525, and 18, 1,504, pretty close to the same. But the difference is the number of cases closed with pay in 16 were 605, and you're estimating 848 in 17 and 873 in 18, which is a 45% increase of cases you've had to close by paying off. And the ones without pay is about a 25 to 30% decrease. And so what I'm missing here, though, is the total dollars. Because it could be that we had a lot of small cases with small amount of money. I don't know the total dollars to really understand what's going on. But if you could get us the total dollars that were involved, that would be helpful. And if you have any answers as to why there were so many more cases we settled with pay versus without pay than 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I can get you, our total dollars are tied to indemnities, so we have that. And as Craig indicated, we're not seeing their substantial increase in that. So it may just be like there are lots of small cases that don't really have a lot of impact on the dollars. Right. And oftentimes it's better just to settle them just to make them go away. Absolutely. But we can get you those figures.
Yeah. But sometimes it's better to settle than to spend the labor and deal with them. The other question I had has to do with, you mentioned on page 1 of your testimony that in fiscal year 17, the law department expects to increase delinquent collections year over year in business taxes by 15%, real estate 5%, water 35%, and in bankruptcy by 15%. Is there any specific strategy you're going to employ to collect these taxes?
Yeah, we do, and luckily it's Francis Beckley, our Chief Revenue Counsel, who can articulate that for you.
Just identify yourself, officially.
Good afternoon. I'm Francis Beckley, Beckley. I'm Chief Counsel to the Revenue Department. I'll take those in order. The biggest innovation we anticipate in the next fiscal year will be large-scale sheriff sale for water. We currently do some in-house work on sheriff sales for water debt. However, our IT system right now cannot hold eligible expenses and attorney's fees, so we are unable to send any of that work to co-counsel for outside counsel to do sheriff sales. We are starting, happily, to deplete our inventory of really large real estate tax cases for sheriff's sale. So we're very much looking forward to being able, we're hoping to have the IT work done sometime in the fourth quarter of this calendar year, and to start using, we have a lot of low-hanging fruit in the water debt area, a lot of really big liens. So we want to start to be able to send those out in addition to doing them internally.
So in the 5-year plan, it said the water debt collection, do you have an idea what the total delinquency is from the water department?
I'm sorry, I don't have that with me today.
Okay. Well, I heard numbers of like $250 million.
There's an awful lot of water debt. I think we will discover, as we did with real estate tax debt, that both a combination of better enforcement and also just better investigation. I think the water books right now are fairly messy, and there's a bunch of uncollectible stuff and stuff that's not actually due. I know we're still negotiating stormwater fees with the Commonwealth, for example. It's not clear that they're liable to pay all of that. So I think we'll get that settled. One thing that the Revenue Commissioner has instituted that has been very useful discipline is we meet with him quarterly, and we look at the top 50 business tax cases, the top 50 real estate tax delinquencies, and the top 50 water debt delinquencies. Now, I can tell you, for example, when we met last time on real estate, there are only 5 cases of real estate delinquency that are over $500,000 now. A few years ago, you easily had 20 that were multi-million. So,
That's good news, I guess, but it's mind-boggling to think we had over 20 over $500,000.
it was, and part of that was bad bookkeeping. We had, for example, exempt railway properties that were in there for big liabilities. Well, you can't sue and effectively enforce if you don't know what's actually in your inventory.
But
So,
does the railroad properties pay real estate taxes?
not when they're in active use. It's like something that belongs to a charity. If they're actually using it for railroad purposes, then it's exempt. If they're just holding it in their inventory, then they have to pay real estate taxes on it. So it's a case-by-case examination.
Okay. I'll come around the second round. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you, Mr.
Councilman.
Chairman.
Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Solicitor Talante, you talked in your testimony about affirmative litigation and some significant legal victories, but from, I guess, a more proactive perspective, do you envision any areas where the Solicitor's Office will take in any type of litigation matters?
The answer will be unsatisfying. Yes, but I can't really discuss. I can brief you privately, but
Okay.
there's some significant matters that we're working on,
Okay.
which, as you know, these things, particularly big matters, they take a lot of time, and often in these cases I'm thinking about, we have to get outside counsel,
Right.
potentially on a contingent basis. But we are working on those.
Okay.
I'm prepared to brief you.
Yeah, I was just one to, I didn't want to assume that you had some things in the pipeline, but we can talk offline about some of those initiatives.
Absolutely.
Also, just some other things that'll be impacting the city from a legal perspective, and I'm curious if you've been monitoring from the Education Law Center's lawsuit regarding fair funding to school districts across the Commonwealth, especially here in the city of Philadelphia, commercial assessments that are going through now. Any thoughts you may have from a legal perspective on that impact on the city?
We haven't evaluated a direct impact, but we've been actively and openly supporting the Education Law Center's lawsuit. We filed an amicus in that suit. I went to the oral argument. In fact, we've been in discussions because we anticipate that a ruling should come down anytime,
I know.
based on date of argument and when the date of issuance. But we haven't done any evaluation because, as I suspect, depending on a ruling, if it's positive, it's just there's some more procedural steps. So we'll have time, if necessary, to be able to look how it impacts. Because as you know, the school district is not a party, but if
Right.
the ruling is broad enough, it may include the district.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just wanted to check how the office is monitoring those, that matter. And then you also talked about e-procurement. I've been very active in promoting best value. But there's some other procurement concepts that we're looking at. I've been talking with people from the procurement department regarding how we can unbundle some of our contracts as another way of trying to get contracts in a smaller perspective for businesses in our city. And that's something we'll probably be having a conversation both with procurement, which we've already started that conversation, and also with representatives from the law department as well.
Yeah, we'll be happy to participate.
Okay. And one last thing, you mentioned about the International Municipal Lawyer Association. I also get those very long, detailed emails. You said there's an event coming up soon, or?
Yes, every year they have it's called the Top 50. So they invite the top 50 largest counties and municipalities to go and talk about, best practices.
Okay.
Last year was in Atlanta, and we're fortunate enough to actually have to host it here in Philadelphia.
Okay. What's the time period for that?
June 2nd and June 3rd.
June 2nd, June 3rd. Okay.
Yeah, so in fact, one of the things we'll be talking about is sanctuary cities. We'll be talking about law firm management, how we can we can advocate for salaries and for quality of life for our attorneys, because we have some of the same challenges across cities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Dom.
Mr. Chairman, first I want to just make a statement that I appreciate the cooperation from your department and many of your attorneys, especially many of them who I've talked to about tax collections and some of those other interests that we have. So they've done a great job, so I just want to commend them. Thank you. So on your budget, I have to tell you, I may have missed this because I came a little late, but it seems to me that you're requesting $1 million less.
Yes, you did miss it.
And
but I can
that should
explain.
be reiterated, though. That's good.
Yeah.
And so I just want to make sure I understand. Purchase of services. Are those services for the outside law firms that represent us on different issues?
That's correct. Last year, we actually saw, and thank you to council for approving a transfer ordinance to allow us to increase our class 200 in anticipation of the bargaining and negotiations for fire, police, and DC 47. But with the experience we had with DC 33, it was clear to us that with Deputy Mayor Rich Laser and the Office of Labor Relations leading negotiations, we've been able to get our outside counsel costs down. Because historically, we project out. So the 4 or 5 years before, we knew that they're up in the 6-7 figures. And based on that example, we are able to talk to budget and say we don't think we'll need that additional money that was transferred for this fiscal year, because we can handle a lot of that stuff in-house. And that's what we've been able to do. And that's what accounts for the reduction.
But this will account for any outside legal fees for the beverage issue?
Yeah, that's
and
accounted
sanctuary
for.
cities issues?
Absolutely. On sanctuary cities, most of the work is being done pro bono at a very minimal cost to the city.
And then, so the other question I have is, we just did just was announced, we revised our commercial assessments, and there's going to be probably a lot of tax appeals for the commercial assessments, I'm guessing, okay? And so my question, I've said this publicly, are we equipped from a legal standpoint to represent the city's interests in these tax appeals? And does that come through your department, or is that through OPA?
It does come to our department. We have an attorney assigned to OPA, Drew Aldinger, and I don't know how he does it, but we've been in discussions with him. He believes he's in a position where he can handle it.
Let me just say this, because I'm getting the emails from all these other law firms who've created a cottage industry for them of representing all the owners who got increases. And if you came to us and said, I need X amount more dollars, whether it's $1 million or $2 million more, to have representation at OPA, it's well worth it, because we're talking about $118 million of commercial assessments.
Yeah, and one of the things we'll do is no matter what we project, we'll see how things are going, because at the same time, as you recognize, Councilman Dom, it may be a case where a little bit of money here saves you a lot of money down the line. But we'll work with Drew because he's the person who does this for us, and see in terms of his capacity.
Okay. One other question I had on the pension collections. I noticed in the 5-year plan, the law department worked to recover $2.1 million in illegal trading profits taken by a brokerage firm that handles certain transactions for the Board of Pensions and Retirement, but we're still seeking recovery of another $1.9 million. Is there any status on that?
I'm just trying to find.
So in the pension collections,
In the 5-year plan or in a...
Yes.
That was 5-year plan.
And how do, by the way, not only is there any status, but how do we, can the law department set up some sort of set of standards for the pension people and investing to avoid these kind of situations going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think our pension staff, the attorneys, do work with the folks at pension on the front end. But oftentimes with that, if somebody's this unscrupulous, there's really nothing you can do to prevent it. But it's something that we're aware of. But fortunately, here we're able to identify it and be able to.
Is there any status on collecting the balance of 1.9 million?
I'll look into that. I don't know what the current status is.
All right, let me see here. Oh, one other question. You mentioned also on April 6th there were approximately 1,020 city-owned properties approved for transfer into the land bank.
Yes.
And these properties been transferred?
I'm not sure. I can check my staff.
Okay. And are there any plans in order to sell these properties? Mainly because I've been told we spend almost $20 million annually maintaining our vacant properties.
Well, I mean, I think that with the land bank, our role is clear. If there's property in the land bank, to have finance and councils involved to evaluate them and see what it makes sense to keep and what makes sense to be sold.
So is that happening now to move them through the system?
They're actually there are conversations happening now. I don't know if you want to hear from.
It's okay as long as it's going to happen in the next 90 days or so.
Yeah. Okay.
Please identify yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Brendan O'Rourke. I'm the Chief Deputy City Solicitor for the Economic Development and Investment Unit.
Thank you.
Generally speaking, as far as the land bank goes, Councilman, we continue. We have a couple of staff attorneys who are committed to reviewing and processing the deeds from those properties that have come from city-related agencies and also those that have been approved and offered up by various members of council to go into the land bank. As of right now, I believe, all told, since the land bank got started in honesty and started operating, we're somewhere around the round of 2,500 to 3,000. I know that there's another 200 or 300 that are close to being approved to going into the land bank right now. They're just working their way through the process on the city end. And those are city properties. Those are not city-related properties.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick question. A lot of discussion started under the DA's testimony as to parity of salaries. How do you deal with attrition, and is there a high attrition rate with you? And then how do you rank by way of salary the attorneys that work for you versus the DA versus the Defenders Association?
Of course, I'm going to say mine are poorest.
Of
but
course. I lobbed that up just for you.
No, one of the for parity. First, I don't think you can really do an adequate parity study that includes us with the DA's office and the defenders because we don't do criminal cases, and the market for what we do is greater, so to speak. So, Brendan O'Rourke, his units. They do economic development, they do commercial and land acquisitions. Their folks leave to go to law firms, and the starting salary for a first-year associate at major law firms is $180,000, and that's what we're competing with. And if you have the ability and the experience of having handled large transactions like the Gallery, like Love Park, you're going to be very much in demand by law firms. I know the only way you can do an apples-to-apples comparison is perhaps with the defenders, their child advocates, and our child welfare unit, because they're both in family court. But for the vast majority of other things, we just don't do what they do.
So I won't dare try to argue with a solicitor. However,
everybody else does. So.
Yeah, but I'm a pass on that. What are your starting salaries?
Our starting salary is $50,865, and one of the challenges we also face is that, again, many of our attorneys, from the law department, and they go to other agencies within the city or public agencies, they get paid substantially more. And I mentioned the school district, but if they go to redevelopment authority, they go to other places.
So how do you deal with attrition and turnover?
I pray a lot. One of the things that, we've been trying to do is really focus on morale. Try to encourage people, tell them if they're doing a good job. We do a lot on attorney development, right? So working with my team, we get more of our people into trainings. We nominate them for awards. So, the Philadelphia Business Journal just recognized 2 days ago Marcel Pratt and Melissa Knight, who's on Labor and Employment Unit, as millennials. I wish I was a millennial, but, up and coming millennials. But to be able to let the rest of the world know the great attorneys we have in the law department, and also to encourage the attorneys in the department that we have their back, that, if you go out there in court, you're going to be developed, and the judges will respect you, and that you're a good attorney. And one of the things that I didn't grow up in the law department, so to speak. I came from other agencies, but I wanted to tell people, like, we got to be out there letting people know how good we are, so that when we advocate for ourselves, we're echoing what people think instead of saying, "Oh, really? You're from the law department?" And so we work a lot on morale. But at a certain point, the attorney will say, "Well, what have you done for me lately?" And that's where we lose people.
So what is your turnover rate?
Actually, the good news is that we've reduced it. We had it. For attorneys, our attrition is down to 8.7%. It was 18% 2 years ago. And that's partly as a result of all the ways that we've been trying to, promote morale. I see attorneys in court. I get feedback from judges. I let them know if they're doing a great job. We send out emails if somebody had a successful outcome. I tell the mayor if there's an NFL draft or some big event, acknowledge the role that the law department played in that, because we often have the invisible part, and I think it's important for people to know the work we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
So, Mr. Solicitor, we, in my office, try to employ that. I come in every day, I tell them, you're doing a good job. I tell them you're valued. And still, my staff grow up and go run for office and get elected. I don't know what to do, so I'm glad
we keep trying.
I keep trying.
But
That is frustrating, isn't it,
It is.
Councilman?
Don't you hate that when that happens? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman O'Neill?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always interesting with attorneys. I just want to tell you that it's almost a year and a half, really recognize a improvement, at least in how I, in my office, have been dealing with the solicitor's office. And there's been ups and downs over the years, but it's been a while, and we've had this conversation, but I want to have it publicly, that I really see that kind of effort, that responsive effort, as we talked about when you were being considered initially for confirmation, that we want the solicitor's office to feel like there are attorneys, and we feel the same way. And I feel that very much so. And that, again, has not always been the case. But even yourself, which is where it all starts and stops, not that I've called you a lot, but you've been very responsive, quickly, meeting in person, talking about something, considering it. Some things we're still, one particular matter we're still talking about, not for today's hearing. But I want to tell you it's been noticed and it's appreciated.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Sanchez.
Good afternoon.
Councilman Greenlee made me promise I was going to hurry up because he's trying to get you out of here, so lucky you. I want to thank you on the issue around sanctuary cities, and I know I was listening to some of the discussion downstairs in my office, and really appreciate you going out and really informing folks about how important we believe in public safety and people's rights. And, it's as simple as, and I think we should use this analogy, it's as simple as no one's going to let a police officer come and look in their house without a warrant, right? It'd be easy if Commissioner Roth could sign warrants, right? Mm-hmm. People would say, no, that's not enough. The commissioner can't decide he's going to write his own administrative warrant and go into someone's house. Everybody wants a warrant. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what we're here doing, is defending the law, which I believe the law is on our side. You know how strongly I believe that. And to the extent that we could better articulate to the residents that we are not putting them in harm's way, that it is ill-informed, mean-spirited people that are putting them in harm's way. Because I think, we're sticking to our constitutional guns. So I just think that's important, and I appreciate the support we get from all of council. In that spirit, I know that the mayor has authorized you to seek legal counsel. Is there anything else in terms of coordinating legal strategies that the city is undertaking that we should be aware of?
I can speak in very general sense just to protect the city's legal interests. On sanctuary cities, we've been very intentional about listening to everyone who want to help us. And so I think for the first time, certainly a long time, we've been very much out there with the Bar Association, with the ACLU, with PILCOP, with some folks who are actually, we're more familiar with them suing us and then working together, because we recognize that there's a real threat to the city, but two, there's a threat to the spirit of the city. So it's not even like the amount of money we may face to lose or the legal jeopardy, is the conversation people are having about our immigrants, or people are having about people who may look like an immigrant, right? Some people, are you an immigrant? If you start asking them about status, that's offensive to some people because, say why I'm not, I'm not an equal citizen. So we've been, because ACLU brought the Galarza case, they're actually been very helpful because they know what the state of play is across the state. Right, they can tell us which counties will have which policies, which then will allow us to talk to those counties, because something that comes, a statement that comes from Franklin County may be perceived differently than if it comes from Philadelphia. And I think every time people say, again, it's Harrisburg doesn't like Philly needs to be defunded, I try to make very clear that this impacts a lot of other counties because they're protecting the Constitution. And so, and we also, some of the people who we want to be able to arm our allies to be able to talk about this in a consistent way. So oftentimes people exaggerate things in a not helpful way, and so we want to bring them in and saying, actually, if we're a sanctuary city, in our city we don't interfere with ICE. If ICE is in operation, we don't get in their way and try to stop that. We don't have the legal authority to do that.
I think there's a misconception about our lack of cooperation, and Councilwoman Gimm and I met with ICE and it was pretty intense. And there are many instances where the city and the police force do cooperate with ICE. I mean, this notion that we're an uncooperating city is not an accurate one. And then real quickly, I know Councilman Heenan was asking you about the procurement process, and I know we're looking at some of the online and some of the other issues. What is the role of the law department, particularly as it relates to change orders and amendments? And how do we help expedite that? Because so many times, and they always say it's at the law department, right?
Yes.
They always say that, right?
I say that, right? No.
So what role does the law department play in those amendments that really impact payment? And what can we do to enhance that?
Well, one of the things that we started talking with the CAO, and I know Craig Straw can amplify this, is that they've given us a proposal which we're considering, that with an amendment, instead of going through the same process which we go through as a new contract, that is, we review it, we do. If it's really just an amendment, as most of our amendments are, as to amount and time, there's a way we can shortcut those steps. And I think in procurement they write a letter or something like that.
Right.
We're considering doing that, and we think if we are able to do that, that would substantially. So we can focus our time on actually new contracts and then be able to put the amendments in a faster track. And I know Craig and Valerie Robinson are meeting with the CAO pretty regularly on this.
Right. Yeah, and we've gone over the metrics and the data to try to make sure that we're meeting our requirements and how to sort of categorize.
Right, and I think this speaks to, and I know we've been working with the CAO office, we had hearings, we want to have further hearings after the budget process. It is very chilling to know that July 1st, when we open up for business, we have so very little executed and conformed contract. That is a bad business practice, right? Because we treat our stakeholders in a way that's disrespectful in that if we value the work and the business that they're doing for us, that they should have that conform contract. And what I'd like to see from the law department's perspective, obviously working with the CAO's office, is, you know, if there's a way for you to begin to track that, I think there are patterns there around, I mean, these are the same contracts every year, right? We go through this every year for us to see the variation between, particularly in the human services area, and I really saw this during the state budget crisis, which we might be in again, given what we're reading in the paper, that we had stakeholders that weren't getting paid 4, 5, or 6 months. And they're encumbering expenses on a letter, right? And I don't think we get value because then we're negotiating after expenses have been incurred. You know, how do you negotiate whether the service needed to be conducted? It really leaves us at a disadvantage. And to me, as if July 1st is day one and we're opening the door as a business July 1st, people's contracts should be getting processed now. Now, I know there's an issue around the budget amounts. The budget gets approved late, and that's the excuse. Let me repeat that. That is the excuse people use, because popping in a number is not preparing a contract. We should be better along on this part. And I just think that one of the things I like you to be is more involved in tracking that and seeing what are the patterns, particularly what are the patterns with departments who may abuse. We have a big concern around in our capital office around the utilization of change orders for people who are lowest bidders, and then milk the system. And I think there are patterns there. And to the extent that you're using your role in that to look at some of that will be important. But I strongly encourage you to figure out how you can streamline that. You know, I think we're like 97 days from beginning to end in this process. We got to do better business. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you, Councilwoman. No other questions? Ms. Solicitor and everyone? Department? Okay, Councilwoman Parker?
No question, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to say a hearty thank you to the Law Department for some legislative assistance you all have provided, particularly for the benefit of residents of the 9th District. And you helped, and you did it exceedingly well. So I wanted to say thank you for the record, because if it was the opposite way, I would say that.
Yes,
so
and I appreciate that. Thank you, Councilman Parker.
And I think we all appreciate what you all do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.